Hey everyone, it's Spencer Hawes here, founder of nichepursuits.com, and today I'm excited to introduce to you Bjork Ostrom from pinchofyum.com. Now, Bjork has been blogging since 2010 with his wife Lindsay on Pinch of Yum, and that site now gets 4 to 5 million page views per month. So it's an extremely successful blog, and in the early days, they actually documented the entire journey, going from earning like $21 in their first couple of months to up to $30,000 a month when they stopped sharing income reports around 2017. And since then, they have no longer shared any income reports. However, they have done a lot more than just Pinch of Yum. So I dive into a lot of SEO strategies with Bjork about Pinch of Yum in terms of how do you update content? How do you interact on social media? Does that help with getting more links, and what is your link building strategy? And a whole lot more in terms of content strategies, providing real value. We actually spend a lot of time on taking the approach of coming from an expert standpoint and a passion standpoint instead of a keyword research standpoint. And Bjork explains that really you kind of need both. And his approach is a little different than the way a lot of niche site builders approach it with keyword research first. They kind of do it second. But Bjork also has started a number of other businesses or has his hands in a number of other businesses. You can go to tinybit.com to see everything that he's involved with, from WP Tasty plugins, Food Blogger Pro, a membership site where they train food bloggers how to start food blogs. And a new tool that they recently started is called clarity.com. And Clarity is spelled with an I, so CLARITI.com. You can check it out. It's a tool for bloggers to organize, update, and track their content. And he dives into exactly how that works and the benefits of that. So if you want to check it out, again, you can go to clarity.com. Otherwise, Bjork gives a great interview, very inspirational, in addition to very strategic heavy in terms of exactly how to go about ranking content, updating content, and other SEO strategies that they're using to get 4 to 5 million visitors a month. And then overall, there's this overarching strategy, if you will, of 1% infinity. And I will let Bjork explain exactly what that is, along with his other tips. So with that, it's a great interview. I hope you stick around so you can get all the strategies that are shared here. And overall, thanks so much for listening to the interview.
Are you looking to spend less on high quality SEO content? WebAssetBuilders.com is doing a one-time special Black Friday offer for all Niche Pursuits listeners. They are offering SEO optimized content at a whopping 30% off, or as little as $24.50 per 1,000 words. That's only 2.45 cents per word. Not only do they provide super high quality SEO content, they also do managed guest post link building. The guys over at Web Asset Builders can even do full content plans focused around low competition keywords in your niche. They can also publish and style all of the content on your website for you, including buttons, charts, and so on. They also do Surfer SEO optimization, and they can get scores as high as 85%. So just use coupon code podcast on checkout at webassetbuilders.com or try a $27 test order. Again, that's coupon code podcast at webassetbuilders.com. The 30% offer is only valid until December 5th, 2022. So don't waste a minute to get your high quality, double-checked, plagiarism-free SEO optimized content.
Hey, Bjork, welcome to the Niche Pursuits podcast.
Hey, happy to be here. Spencer, you're one of those people where you're like an everlasting internet friend. Like in the world of internet time, I feel like it goes back a really long time for how long I've known you, followed what you're up to. So it's really fun for me to be here, and hopefully we can cover some stuff that's helpful and motivating and encouraging to people who listen.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's awesome to have you, Bjork. Like you said, we've kind of been internet friends, I guess, for a long time, and kind of almost started our blog similar time frame. Like
Yeah.
Pinch of Yum, was that around 2010, 2011, or
Yep.
was it a little
2010
earlier? Okay.
is when Pinch of Yum started. And there's a few people who were kind of doing the stuff that you were doing, where you're talking about kind of this strategically building websites and the considerations around that. And at the time, sometimes I get back to this mindset, but it's deep in the archives of my brain. But it's like, it was such a new, interesting, like fascinating thing at the time, just in general, but also for me. Like, it was a brand new thing for me. And so it's fun to think back to those early stages when it was less familiar, and it was all, there's something about it, the newness of it, that was especially exciting. But there's also something really great about being in it 10, 11, 12 years, where you feel like you kind of know it a little bit and understand it. And at the same time, the more you know, the more you realize the more, how much you don't know.
Yeah, there's so much more to learn. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so it is like I started Niche Pursuits in 2011, right? And so we were both kind of getting started blogging, around the same time. And I know back in the day, we were both kind of sharing income reports and
Mhm.
doing a lot of things like that. And then I think the first time we met in person was at a Rhodium event 3 years ago, 4 years
Yeah.
ago in Mexico. And so that was a lot of fun. And we've met a couple times in person since then. And so I know you have a lot going on
Sure.
as well, beyond what maybe people are even aware of
Yeah.
with Pinch of Yum. And so before we jump into a lot of specifics and strategies, maybe you can give the listeners just kind of a quick overview of your business ventures, everything that you're
Sure.
kind of involved with.
Yep, for sure. So Pinch of Yum was kind of the original, like the first business that we started. And we've started other businesses along the way. There's a site that Lindsay and I joke about called Picture Pretzel. And I
Okay.
was really excited about Picture Pretzel because I was going to sell like Photoshop actions. Maybe it's still a big thing, but it was like a big thing at that point. We sold like one Photoshop action. So, which I was so excited about when it sold. So Pinch of Yum was the first one. We've had a lot of businesses that don't currently exist that we kind of experimented with along the way. But the ones that do exist that we still have are under this umbrella of a parent company called TinyBit, which is all about this idea of continual improvement, getting a tiny bit better every day forever, which we can talk about a little bit later on, kind of that being a core way of how we think about doing business. But the other ones that people might be aware of, so Pinch of Yum is the one that most people are aware of. It's a recipe blog, and my wife Lindsay produces most of the content for that. So she does the photography and the writing and the recipe development. So all credit to her for building that incredible audience and following that she has. We have Food Blogger Pro, which is a membership site for food creators. We started that in the 2012, 2013 range. We have a WordPress plugins business called WP Tasty. We have a nutrition analysis software called Nutrifox, a software product called Clarity, and then we acquired another site called Curbly, which is like a home DIY site that we also operate. So all of those are under the umbrella of TinyBit. And then one of the things that we've done, I don't know if this is something that you'd want me to speak to, but with some of the operating income that the operating profits, one of the ways that we've been trying to think about reinvesting is like reinvesting into areas of diversification outside of the online world. So we also have a small portfolio of commercial real estate, and that's kind of a piece of the puzzle for us too, hedging against like Google algorithm changes and Instagram updates and all of those things. For us, it feels good to have some of our investments, not just in digital things, but also in like brick and mortar things you can touch and like doors you can actually open and walk through, things like that. So
Right.
the landscape for us from a business perspective that's kind of the overview of what it looks like.
Yeah. So you definitely, you have a lot going on. I like what you said that these are the businesses that have survived, right? That you can kind of list, that you had so many other maybe crazy ideas or things you tried that maybe didn't work, that at the time you thought were good ideas. And I'm the same. And I often maybe don't always point that out, that I've tried a dozen things and like two of them worked, really well.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's encouragement to listeners, right? Is that, just because an idea fails doesn't mean the next one won't be the one that works.
Yeah. And I think there's something about the one of the downsides with the internet is oftentimes what we're doing is we're looking at or consuming somebody's highlight reel. You hear that a lot, especially on like social media, on Instagram. But I think it's also really true for business. Like you look at what somebody's done, oh my gosh, they've built this awesome business. And then you're working on something and you're kind of slogging through it. It feels like maybe you're not making progress. But a lot of times other people have been at that point and they persevered through it. Maybe they continued with that same idea and eventually it caught. Maybe they decided to wind it down and started a new thing, and then that thing took off. So I think it's more often than not, what you think it is when you look at somebody else's reality, personal life or business life, it's not as like clean or glamorous as it might seem from the outside. And I think there's encouragement in that it normalizes some of the reality of what it means to be human and it means to run a business. And it's like both of those things are like really hard sometimes. It's hard to be a human sometimes, hard to run a business oftentimes, and we don't often see that. So as much as possible, I think it's good to like revisit that reality when talking about business or life, really.
Yeah, 100%. I really like that. And I was just talking with somebody recently about like raising teenagers, right? You can look at that through the same lens as like running a business almost, right? You get this teenager that, doesn't fit into the square hole that you thought, and all parents are going through this, right? And I think all business owners are going through struggles, right? And nothing is perfect out there. And so that's a super, super good point to make. And so, and then as well, you chatted about, as your business is now matured, right? You're trying to diversify outside of the online businesses. And so I think there is a spectrum there. As a lot of people put all their time, energy, and money into first finding something that works and is generating income. And I think that's the smart way to go. But as the business maybe matures, right, you're looking to diversify. And so we may not jump into that too much, but I just think that is super cool that you're now going into commercial real estate and thinking about, okay, how can we be more stable, whether it's Google updates or economic updates or anything else. And so as I understand, Pinch of Yum is either the biggest or right up there at the top, right? In terms of income. So let's chat about that one a little bit.
Sure.
Pinch of Yum, how did it get started? I know, like you said, it's been around since 2010. But what's kind of the origin story of that?
Sure. So Pinch of Yum, started in 2010. We started on a Tumblr blog, and
Nice.
The very first post, we couldn't figure out how to get like an image and text in the same post. So first we did a Tumblr update, which was like a text update. And then it was like another post after that, which was images that we wanted to be a part of the first post, but we couldn't figure out how to put them together. So that was the start of it. I mean, that was us trying to figure it out. Didn't know what WordPress was, didn't know the idea of like a self-hosted WordPress site versus, WordPress.com, all of those things, completely unaware of it. And day by day, you start to pick up information and learn, and you start to get better at the things that you realize you need to get better at. For Lindsay, that was photography. That was super important. It was writing, and she got, and still is, passionate about how do you write in a way where people feel connected to what you're writing, not just like search optimization, but I think personally, a lot of search optimization is people optimization. Like it's this balance of structuring a piece of content in a way where Google can understand it. Like you're smart about structured data, schema, you're smart about having your core web vitals, optimized. But really, like if you're not producing stuff that doesn't resonate with people, that doesn't impact people, that they don't want to share, it's not going to matter. If you have all of that stuff perfectly tuned, it doesn't matter. And so that was a big part of it for Lindsay, writing in a way where people can connect. It's obviously the recipe development. For me, it was stuff like ad optimization. It was the behind the scenes stuff, even like bookkeeping. What does it look like to do bookkeeping well, to have tight books, to understand like where your revenue is coming from, where your expenses are, building systems around that. What does it look like to hire a team, W-2 versus 1099, all of those things were some of the things that I started to learn about and think a lot about. And so it was just by chance that for Pinch of Yum specifically, Lindsay and I kind of fell in these, what would be like departments within a business. It wasn't strategic. It was just really lucky. Like there could have been another scenario where we both were really interested in photography, and then, you know, what we created would have been in a much different place, for better or for worse. But it happened to be that we each had these kind of respective interests that kind of complemented each other. So we started working on figuring those things out, nights, weekends, you know, lunch breaks. I remember going to Subway and working for 30 minutes trying to figure out certain things, listening to podcasts, things like that. And then eventually I started doing what you referred to before with these income reports. We started, our first one was $21, and we did it all the way up through, it was maybe around $30,000 in a month.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so we kind of chronicled that process. I think one of the things that was fun for me, and I think also for readers, was you got to see the complete story. Like, we started in chapter 1, which was like, we're not making any money really, and we want to figure out how to do that. And people were able to follow us through that journey. For me, it was really an experiment. Can we do this, especially in a niche where it's not necessarily business oriented? It's food. And there's some people who said, like, you can't do it. It's just not possible to do with food. And then there's another camp of people who are like, you could do it with anything. Like, there's a passionate group of, it's a niche pursuits, right? Like, if you build a niche, there's going to be in the world, there's going to be enough people to come alongside you and say, I'm going to support you if what you're doing is good. It's the Kevin Kelly, 1,000 True Fans. Like, if you're a musician and you have 1,000 true fans and you produce 2, you know, things that people can buy a year for $50, you can create a sustainable income. And so that was the experiment in the early stages. I feel like we proved out the experiment by saying, hey, we're got to a point that's a full-time salary for both Lindsay and I. And that's when we decided to wind it down. It felt like it wasn't really serving us in that season the same purpose. And it felt a little bit like of a tension point, in that the purpose of Pinch of Yum was food and recipes. It wasn't business. And so at that point, we kind of separated that out, and we really talk about kind of the business of food content within Food Blogger Pro.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the story for Pinch of Yum. Food Blogger Pro came 2012, 2013. It's a membership site. What we did for that was we pre-launched before we were done with it. 3 months before, we got $10,000 from people who paid to become early access members. And we did it where if you signed up 3 months before, you got a year for like $29 or something like that. If you signed up 2 months before, it was like 70. And then if you signed up 1 month before, it was 110 or something like that. Like, motivating people to sign up earlier, and then the price went up as it got closer. But that funded Food Blogger Pro. It got us to the point where we could use that money to invest in the business and grow it. And, you know, depending on the season, could be anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 members who are a part of Food Blogger Pro, paying $30 to $350 a year, depending on when they signed up, to be a part of that. And that's coming up on 10 years here that we've had that community and that membership site. We do a podcast as well. I could talk about the other businesses, but I don't want to get too deep into the weeds of kind of the origin stories. Those are kind of the two big ones.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots there. So you said, 2017 roughly is when you stopped doing the income reports. And
that sounds right.
Is that also when you went full time, or did you quit your job a little bit before then? Or
yeah. So our story of going full time is interesting. So, which everybody probably thinks their story is interesting, but here's ours. 2010 is when we started. I don't remember exactly how far into it we started to experiment with trying to create an income. It was maybe 6 months, a year, or something like that. And Lindsay was a teacher. I worked at a nonprofit, and we were still in this stage of like getting out of school and feeling like, I remember when I first started to look at how much I'd be earning coming out of school. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was like 40,000. I was like, what am I going to do with all that money? Like, you still have this mindset where you haven't had lifestyle inflation. You know, we have kids now, and there's all those considerations as well. But so there's an advantage to us from a timing perspective when we started, in that replacing our income wasn't a huge shift. Like, we weren't making a substantial amount. It's not like we had these really high paying corporate jobs that would have been hard to leave.
Yeah.
And we also took a really significant paycheck in the most kind of transitional time for the blog, which was 2012 to 2013, because Lindsay went over to work for a year at an orphanage. So she has 3 adopted siblings. They're from this orphanage in the Philippines called the Children's Shelter of Cebu. And I had never been there before. Everybody in Lindsay's family had been there. And so we were planning a 2-week trip. Before, like months before we left, the president called and was like, this is kind of a big question, but would you be interested in staying a year and potentially teaching?
Wow.
And so that was 2012, 2013. Continued to work on the blog during that time, publish content, share a little bit about what it was like to live and work in the Philippines. But during that time, it's like I was kind of working a little bit part-time remote. Lindsay was an orphanage. And so we had to raise some money to cover her salary. So it really was not a lot that we had to cover. So when we came back, that 2013, 2014 time period, we continued to work part-time and transitioned into working on the blog full-time. So if it's possible, the advice for people who are thinking of making that transition, one of the things that was really beneficial for us was to kind of go like 100%. So we were full-time W-2 employees, Lindsay a teacher, me part-time, or me at a nonprofit. And then to think about like, how could we scale back? So when we got back, we were 75% essentially each, Lindsay and I. And so we had 1 or 2 days a week where we were able to dedicate just to working on the blog. And then it kind of went like 50-50 for me. And then I was working 1 to 2 days a week at this nonprofit. And then eventually it was like, okay, it's time for us to make the transition. So it was really nice to be able to tier back and to tier down the transition instead of making this hard stop at one single point, which I know is impossible for everybody, but it was helpful for us to make that transition. So it was essentially like 2014 when we both transitioned into working on all of this full time.
Yeah. And I think that's, good motivation, I guess, or reality check, maybe on the other hand, for people that, starting a blog, it can take time, right? You had to work on it for
sure.
like 3 years, and that was 2 of you. In your spare time, of course.
But it was a lot of spare time.
But it was a lot of spare time, right? And I'm sure towards the end, it became like, okay, this has legs, and right, we're going to really try to, in 2013, 2014, put a ton of time into it, probably.
But especially in the world of content, and especially if you're new to it, like for you, Spencer, you could probably start something, and that timeline, if everything else went away, like the knowledge you've acquired over the past 10 to 12 years, you'd be able to compress your time period into like covering your full-time salary into a pretty short period of time.
Right. Like you didn't even know what WordPress was, right? You were on Tumblr, right?
But if you're starting out, it's going to take a while. And especially in the world of content, like it just takes time.
Yeah. No, it does. So one question about Food Blogger Pro. How did you launch it? I mean, your site, Pinch of Yum, is mostly people reading about recipes and interested in food. I guess, was it because you had, you'd been sharing income reports, so you had some people, and that's kind of the email list you had built.
We had essentially built an audience for 2 years in a really specific niche, which was food creators who wanted to learn who already had or wanted to learn how to start a blog. Excuse me. And my advice for people would be, for us, you look at it and you're like, oh my gosh, how did you do that? You launched this thing, you got $10,000, and then that propelled it into this thing that you now have. But it really was 2 years of creating content for a specific niche. It was building an audience. And then it was saying, now we have something to sell. We didn't really sell anything and didn't have any intent to for a long period of time.
Right.
It was actually from those reports that we realized there's a need for this, because we hear from people a lot. They're saying, how did you do this? What was that like? Could you teach me how to do this thing? And so really what it was starting in an area of interest, a curiosity, pursuing that over a period of time with no expectations. From that, listening to the people that we were talking to, and coming out of it was the idea. So it wasn't like we had this grandiose idea. What we had was like an area of interest, an area of passion, an area of curiosity, time dedicated to that, and then a response to that community that we had built around their needs.
Yeah, I love that. When you're kind of heads down working on a business or in a business, and you start to see something that resonates with your audience, right? You either go further into that, or you have light bulb moments that are like, you know what, we need to do this, right? For you as Food Blogger Pro, and of course now at WP Tasty plugins, you're like kind of in the business, in the weeds, right? You and Lindsay are still creating the blog post, and you're like, we need a better way to do recipes, right? And so you created a plugin. So because a lot of our listeners are WordPress users, maybe just tell us very briefly what WP Tasty is, how many plugins there are.
Sure.
Yeah,
absolutely. So there's 4 plugins. It started with one called Tasty Recipes. They're all kind of branded with like tasty, whatever it is that they do. So Tasty Recipes does structured data and visual markup for a recipe. So when you search in Google, one of the things that's important, and this should be a little note for anybody who, there's a lot of people who would know about this, some who might not. This is like a really smart audience, so most probably do know about this, but structured data. And essentially what structured data is it's a signpost to a search engine, we'll say Google, to tell it what the content is when they come and look at a site. So in our case, Google comes and crawls a post, and we have a little signpost using structured data saying, this is about a recipe. And then with that information, Google can go back and mark up their the search result in a certain way.
right.
Excuse me. And so that's Tasty Recipes. Tasty Roundups is similar. If you have a roundup post, essentially what you're doing is you are telling Google this is a roundup of other pieces of content, and here are where those other pieces of content are. So in our case, it's often recipe roundups. But you can use it for any type of roundup. Tasty Links is kind of a light link plugin that automatically marks up any keyword with an affiliate link if you want to, or adds kind of like recommended products within a post. Like we include it within a recipe card. So like if you have a knife or a slow cooker that you'd recommend. And then we have a plugin called Tasty Pins, which optimize for Pinterest. So for visual forward blogs, like a food blog, Pinterest is, it was more important. As they've changed their algorithm, it's become less important, but still it's important to think about how do you optimize your images. Maybe there's an image, like an example would be you have a sidebar image of yourself. And when somebody goes to click pin, you don't want like this picture of Lindsay to show up when it's a taco recipe and for somebody to pin that to Pinterest. So you can do things like using Pinterest code that they give you. You can say like, don't show this image when somebody wants to pin this thing, or make sure that this description is being used in the Pinterest description when an image is being pinned. So it's all around optimization of on-site Pinterest related considerations.
Yeah, that's great. So if people want to check those out, of course, they can go to wptasty.com. They can look at the plugins there. I love chatting with you about the business side of WP Tasty, as we've done privately, right? Talking about how you grew plugins. We're not going to dive into that here today, just because I know most of our listeners love the content side, the SEO side of stuff. So I'd like to chat a little bit about that with Pinch of Yum. Are you willing to share like an overall picture of like how much traffic Pinch of Yum gets and how much of that is SEO traffic?
Yep. I don't know the specific SEO percentages. It's vast majority SEO, 4 to 5 million a month page views for Pinch of Yum. And, you know, the catalog of content that we have has been built up over 12 years, and the recipe world is super high traffic because people are searching for recipes more than they're searching for, you know, like a product review on a whisk or something like that, whatever it might be. So the earnings probably aren't per page view, probably aren't as high as what it would be with like an affiliate site or, you know, if you're selling an actual product. But yeah, that's kind of the lay of the land. It would be in terms of like traffic, it would be search would be most important. It would be like Pinterest or Instagram after that, and then maybe Facebook. Well, and then direct. It would be search, direct, and then some of the social media accounts. But like most of those, as people know, most of those are becoming more like insular in terms of letting or wanting people to get out of the platform. So the traffic, we don't view like Instagram. There's Lindsay has, I think, 1.1 million followers on Instagram. We don't view that as like a traffic source. It's like a place to do sponsored content.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So 4 to 5 million visitors a month. Congrats. I mean, that's
page views to be clear.
Views. Yeah. Still huge site. And obviously a great business. How much content, if you're aware, is on the site? Like how many articles, posts?
Yeah, I think maybe, I haven't looked recently. In my mind, it's like 1,200.
Okay.
Like
and
1,200, 1,400.
And do you know roughly how many articles a month you guys are still producing?
Not many.
Okay.
3 to 4.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So it really isn't very much.
No.
So what are you doing in terms of content?
What are we doing in general? What are we doing with all of our time?
Right.
You know, and part of that is the recipe world is unique in that it's evergreen. So a lot of it is revisiting and improving older content, making sure that it's as quality as it can be. And it doesn't mean like continually adding stuff just to add stuff, but like if we see an opportunity to improve something, so it's that. The other piece is like the other options would be you could bring in contributors. So then you have other people who are producing content and becoming contributors, and you kind of build a contributor site. But just have made a decision, at least in this season, like Pinch of Yum is a personal brand. It's Lindsay as the primary voice. That hasn't been true for every season. We've also had seasons where Lindsay's, was on maternity leave and said, hey, we're going to prioritize continuing to produce content, and the team's going to help with that. Or we've had seasons where just not producing, like Lindsay's just kind of said, hey, I'm going to take a break for a month and kind of step back. So contributor would be one option. The other option would be just to produce more, like just for Lindsay to produce more. But she's also in a season where we have 2 girls, 2 and 4. She wants to be home with them.
Yeah.
So she's just kind of reduced capacity and said, hey, once a week, maybe twice a week is what we're going to do for the season, knowing that we might leave some, potential upside on the table, but that's okay. Like, we want to make sure that like our work is serving us and that we're not serving our work, and which is a really hard balance to figure out, because there is some type of kind of feedback loop that becomes addicting. Like, hey, if I do this thing, then I get this reward, and that feels really good. And like in our case, the feedback loop of parenting doesn't always work the same way, where you're like, if I do all this work and I'm like, really go out of my way to like create an experience for my child, they might like kick and scream and hit me. But it's like, we still want to figure out how do we prioritize that in this season, knowing that it's, it doesn't last forever. So that's kind of the reason. It's not a strategy from a like optimization standpoint. It's more of like a life optimization.
Right. Yeah. And still, I mean, 3 to 4 articles a month is still like a lot of work for Lindsay. I'm sure,
I think that's
doing recipes,
I think that's
pictures, right?
I think that's the thing that people don't realize is, who I was talking to somebody just the other day. I think it was somebody on our team. She was with us as a writer for a season when Lindsay wasn't writing as much for emails and things like that. And I was talking to her, and she was saying her friend was like, why don't you start a blog? Like, you've worked, for Pinch of Yum, you've seen kind of the ins and outs, food, writing. And what she said was, she was like, I also saw like how much work goes into a single post. It's multiple rounds of recipe development, it's photography, there's video, there's just a lot that goes into it. And so it's not like a standard article per se, where you're writing 500 words and then publishing it. There's multiple different kind of considerations that go along with it. So yeah, that's a valid point.
Yeah. And then even after it's published, right? And sharing on social media, maybe doing some other clips on wherever, right? Videos and things like that. So it's a lot of work. But it does sound like SEO is the largest portion of your traffic. That's obviously built up over time. But do you have kind of a general SEO strategy, or what's worked really well for you that maybe listeners can implement?
Sure. So this is where this will probably be like in the art and science of search optimization in business, whatever it might be. This probably leans more into the art than the science.
Okay.
But the art for us being that, and this is important because we are the ones that are creating the content. Like, and by we, I mean Lindsay, when speaking directly about Pinch of Yum. One of the most significant considerations is your ability to continue to have a good relationship with the thing that you are talking about, writing about, creating content about. And in order to do that, you have to make sure that you still enjoy it. And so in the world of food, there's going to be a category of people who are really motivated by keyword research. Like they're going to start the process of their discovery around what they're going to produce a recipe for by doing like keyword research and seeing what's available and what's kind of low-hanging fruit that's going to give me the most traffic, which is great. Like for those people, I think they have a lot of success. And I think in some ways, if Pinch of Yum was built in a way where we were both like that, would probably even have the ability to have more traffic or, search traffic, whatever it might be. But that's not how really I'm built, it's definitely not how Lindsay's built. And so for her, the primary starting point is like, what is a recipe I'm excited about and piece of content, more broadly speaking? What is something that I think will resonate with people in this season? And starting there, and it's not starting with keyword research. It's not starting with like competitive analysis. It's just purely starting with a recipe or a piece of content that she feels drawn to.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that we're not strategic about tracking those. And oftentimes what you'll have is like, you'll come up with, it's not like the type of content is really esoteric and weird. It's like Rice Krispie bars. Like people are still going to search for Rice Krispie bars.
Yeah.
But the fact is like, that's not where we're starting with the keyword research, but we will come back to that by tracking the performance of a keyword within Ahrefs. So let's say that we have something that's performing really well, like chili.
Mm-hmm.
Lindsay produced a piece of content around chili that did really well, had a lot of search traffic, has a lot of search traffic. Monitoring that and saying like, okay, this is important, it's performing well. If this starts to slip, like if we go from position 3 to position 6, we need to trigger some type of flag that has us go back to that and say, okay, what can we do to regain that position within search? And you can use Google Search Console for that. Obviously, people know it's a super powerful tool to track kind of performance over time.
Mm-hmm.
We use Ahrefs as a tool to track some of that stuff. So we are thinking strategically from a search perspective, but we're leading not with strategy, but with like passion and interest and audience.
Yeah.
And then folding in some kind of search best practices around that, similar to some of the site structure stuff, like how are you organizing your site? Do you have strong category pages? Right now we're working on building out authoritative author pages to make sure that we're doing what we can from a expertise and authority perspective. So it's not that we're ignoring search, we're just not leading with it.
Right. Yeah. And it sounds like you're able to do that, or Lindsay's able to do that because she is so passionate and in tune with the niche, right? Like she is also kind of the end consumer in a way. And so she understands her readers super well and kind of has a pulse on what might be interesting, right? And maybe that's something that people can't develop overnight, right? Maybe it takes 2 or 3 years to be blogging about it, to go like, you know what, this would be a really interesting subject or topic or whatever.
Yep. And that's if you want to be the person that's creating the content. Like, do you want to be the expert? Do you want to be known? Do you want to be the person that, like people come up to Lindsay and be like, hey, are you Pinch of Yum? Like, or to me and be like, hey, are you Pinch of Yum's husband? And it's because they know her because she's the person at kind of the center of this. you and I both know a lot of people, their passion is like the mechanics of the search, which is the search process, or like the processes behind the scenes. That's also awesome. Like if that's you, lean into that. The thing that you'll have to remember though is at some point you're going to need somebody who is that like expert if you are really going to do it well. Like you can't really fake, or you can only do it for so long, like true expertise and authority to the degree that it's actually helpful to people in a really meaningful way that's multiples above what other people are doing. You can only take that so far if you aren't actually really passionate and interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm thinking of even the Rhodium community. There's lots of people who lead with things like search optimization and keyword research, like thinking about a niche that they can pursue, and then bringing in, this is a key piece, and it's a hiring process that you have to solve, bringing in an expert to be that person who's like, I love pickleball and I want to write about pickleball all day long. I want to think about pickleball all day long. And if you feed me an article about like best pickleball paddles, I'm going to love to deep dive on that and write about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can come at it from either way, but you have to have both of those things fulfilled on either side. You have to have the expertise and the authority of the subject, but you also have to have the expertise and authority around best practices for how to set up a website, structured data, if that exists within your category, which it probably does, best practices from a performance standpoint with Core Web Vitals, things like that. So both of those things I think have to exist.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice there. And so to kind of recap at least a portion of your SEO strategy, as I'm hearing it, right? You've got to have those two ingredients of that, analytical keyword research data mind, coupled with somebody that's passionate or an expert in the niche that can actually produce that super valuable content. Both are important. And then you're going in and looking at content that either could be performing a little bit better or needs an update, and you're going in and updating that content to help it perform better in the search engines.
Yep.
What else is working well as a general SEO strategy? Did you do a lot of link building? Are you doing link building? That sort of thing.
No, to both.
Okay.
And that's not necessarily best practice. That's just how we came into it.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
sure,
it wasn't something we thought about doing. How we always approach things was like, it was very content forward. Like, what is the most helpful piece of content? How can we make these pictures better? How do we improve this recipe? The other thing that Lindsay's really good at is like, what does it look like to build momentum around like a shared experience? And I think it's link building in the sense that it's creating things that people want to link to. It's not link building in the sense that you're like finding a broken link and emailing somebody and saying like, hey, can you switch this link out with like one that I recommend?
Right.
Like the purest form, and I think the most effective form of link building is producing something that naturally people want to link to. And so an example would be last year in January, Lindsay and the Pinch of Yum team did a January meal plans, and like created these meal plans as a free thing, sent it out to people. And there's just a ton of momentum and excitement around it. And there's naturally a lot of people linking to it, talking about it on social. And that, I think, from a link perspective and from a search perspective, all of those unknowns, some of them are known, some of them are unknowns. But I think what at its core, what like a Google is trying to do is figure out like where are the most helpful places to point people. And usually the most helpful places to point people are going to be the things that are actually the most helpful. And that's where I think in the long run, it's going to be most beneficial for you to focus is, how can I create something that's going to resonate with people, that they will then do the things that naturally people do when something is interesting or engaging or helpful or that they want to share, and letting search engines do what they're really good at, which is respond to those things that people are doing naturally online. It's almost like a switch in a mindset of like, it's trying to align what you're doing with what Google's trying to do, which is surface the best piece of content. And instead of trying to figure out how Google's trying to do that, what you're trying to do is figure out what is the most helpful thing for people, and leading with that and letting Google follow behind.
Yeah. Yeah, I love what you're saying here, and hopefully people are kind of attaching to this, just this quality first approach. It resonates really well with me, and so I love that approach that you guys have taken there. And I guess somewhat related, and you already mentioned that you've got like 1.1 million followers on Instagram. You've got a large Pinterest, following. So social media has become core to the business.
Yep.
And would I be correct in sort of assuming that in a way also helps get noticed by Google, or maybe even attract links, right?
Sure.
Because you share it with 1 million people, like some of those are going to share it on their website or something, right?
Yep. One of the things that we think about, the visual that I have in my mind is this idea of a car wash. And this is specifically when we're looking at a piece of content that we're going to go back and like refresh. That's the idea of the car wash. It's like we want to spiff it up a little bit. What are the different things that we can do with that piece of content that may or may not have an influence on search traffic, but definitely have an influence on visibility to that specific piece of content? So an example being, if something goes viral on Pinterest, does that have an impact on search traffic? I don't know. I mean, all of those links are going to be no follow. So from that perspective, like more links on a Pinterest may or may not have an impact. I have no clue. But that car wash idea, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we've looked at this piece of content. We've decided we want to add some things to it. These are some things that we might do. We might take new pictures, like refresh the pictures to be more helpful and just better. Like we're going to add an FAQ section. So for those who use Yoast, which is most popular search plugin, there's a way that you can add a block around frequently asked questions, and that's going to be structured data, which we talked about, that signpost. So you're telling Google these are questions and answers related to this specific piece of content. So we might put in an FAQ box. We might put in a video, which also has structured data around it. There was a report from an ad network that we work with, and they saw that there's a 30% increase in search traffic when correlated video was added to a piece of content. I don't know where they got that data, but
interesting.
That's what it said. There's an additional plugin that you can download. I think this is how it works with Yoast, that will mark up and create a sitemap for your videos as well. So that's really important. So in that car wash, we might add a video for that specific piece of content. We might add additional sections. So we might look at some of the areas that are confusing within the recipe, or things that we could build it out. Maybe we want to talk a little bit about how to make it vegan or something like that. We'll look at if there's any like cleanup that needs to happen. Maybe the images were too large and they need to be compressed for some reason, if they got missed in the process of getting compressed. So like performance related stuff. And then what we'll do after we've updated the post is we'll look at putting that in other places. What does it look like to mention it on Instagram in a reel or a story? Publish it to Twitter, Facebook. What does it look like to push it out to Pinterest? Great. So we've done that. Maybe we include it in an email newsletter and we send that out. We could also potentially move it to the front of the blog, so anybody who's coming sees that right away, and that gets exposure there. So we kind of go through this process of saying, we see that this specific piece of content has the opportunity to be improved. Maybe it's slipped a little bit in search results, put it through the car wash, oftentimes what we'll see is it, excuse me, it comes out the other side looking better. Like it performs better. It, is getting more search traffic. It regains some of the position in search. Personally, I'm not enough of a data nerd to look at it and like say, and that happened because this change.
Right.
But we know it's like there's this advertising quote where they say like, I know that 50% of my advertising works. I just don't know which 50%.
Mm-hmm.
It's less true now with like when we have all this data on advertising, but especially like 30 years ago. But I feel like that's true when we approach updating and republishing or promoting an older piece of content to get it to try and perform better. Like we do all these things. We don't know which specific one it is that's going to improve the performance, but we do know that it's common for the outcome of that process to be that specific piece of content performs better.
Yeah. Now you've already mentioned something. Your company is called TinyBit.
Yeah.
And this is going to all connect with what you just talked about. I think with updating content and improving, you like to talk about something called 1% Infinity, right? And that I think all ties together: the TinyBit, the 1% Infinity, and this car wash approach almost, right? With the updating content in that specific example. So tell us about 1% Infinity and how you've applied it to your business.
Sure. I mean, essentially at its core, it's just this idea of compounding. And I saw this tweet the other day, and it was talking about Warren Buffett. And at 37, it said, I don't know if this is true or not. It's one of those things where I don't know what the source is and I didn't check. But it said at 37, he had 0.01% of his net worth compared to what it has right now.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of related to that is this idea of people underestimate what they can do it's better to say it like this. People overestimate what they can do in a year, underestimate what they can do in 10 years. I think compounding plays into that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it really comes back to that. It's this idea that, for you and I, Spencer, here at 12 years in, we can start to see some of the compounding that has come from 12 years of work in a specific area. But for somebody who's 1 year in or 2 years in, they can look at it and be like, oh my gosh, like, why haven't I made more progress? And oftentimes what it takes is showing up every day saying like, what am I after? Getting really clear on where you're going. And then saying, what is it that I need to do today to get incrementally better, like a tiny bit better today. And it's not massive gains. It's not like crushing it every single day. It's like slow and consistent, steady improvement. And that could be applied on a macro level, like as you look at your life holistically,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be applied with a specific thing, like trying to improve your search traffic and saying like, what is the one thing I can do today that will help me moving forward? And there will always be one of those things. And you don't need to do everything in a day. You don't need to work 14-hour days, but you should show up and say like, what can I get a little bit better at today? And how can that help me propel me towards where I'm going?
Yeah, I love that approach because a lot of times we can set these big audacious goals and look at it and go, some days get frustrated, right? Like I've got like 100 things on my to-do list if I want to hit this huge goal. But the approach of like, you know what, I'm going to just get a little bit better today or improve this one thing a little bit better than it was last week or even last year, right? Just the continuous improvement there. I love that. You can apply that, everywhere. Business, life, wherever you want. And so I have tons more questions, but I don't want us to go on, too long here. So I wanted to jump to a new software tool that you recently launched called Clarity. And maybe you can tie the two together. Tell us, what it is, but did you create it partially because of this 1% Infinity idea?
Yeah. The thing that it probably ties best back towards is that car wash process that I talked about, and the switch that has happened for us from a mindset perspective when it comes to content. And we've gone from this idea of like, how do we like create a factory where we're planting seeds to how do we tend the garden? And I think once you've been producing content for a certain period of time on a specific site or within a specific niche, there will be a time when it starts to become more advantageous for you to tend to your current content versus creating new content. And that's why for a site like Pinch of Yum, we're not producing 3-4 posts a week, because we have these other posts, and the return on our time is going to be better by looking at an older piece of content and making sure that that's performing well. So clarity came from the fact that we were running our process for this off of a spreadsheet. So we had 1,200 posts, and we had a column that was like alt text in all images, and like going through and saying like, okay, or have we optimized this post for alt text? Or we were going through and doing something that we wanted to do on our side. And we didn't do this for all posts, but like recipe tested. Like, did we test this recipe and make sure that it's good? Like, okay, check, that's great. Or we were doing things like wanting to sort order. This happened with a site that we acquired recently. And even for Pinch of Yum, this just came up. We wanted to quickly sort order content that wasn't getting any traffic and spin up a project around that to just delete that. Like an example for Pinch of Yum is we had these really old posts that were giveaway posts, like win a free $50 gift card. It's like, that's not valuable for anybody. Like, you can't even win the gift card anymore. So we need to delete that. So Clarity, what it does is it's a tool. It's clariti.com, clarity.com. And it's a tool that brings in data from 3 different places. Your WordPress blog. So it brings in things like word count. It brings in things like how many images, broken links. It brings in things like broken images, alt text, like all of these components of a post or an article. It brings that in so you can quickly sort order and find information about your content. And then it also hooks into Google Analytics and Google Search Console. So then it brings in additional information like Pageviews, and it will attach that to the WordPress information. And it brings in keyword information. So you can see what are the specific keywords that are ranking from Google Search Console. More information is being connected and brought in over time as we improve and enhance it. But the basic idea is it brings all of those things into one place, and it allows you to quickly sort and filter and analyze your content, and then to create a project out of that. So an example would be for Pinch of Yum. What does it look like for us to find all the pieces of content that had, let's say, less than 50 page views in the last year, and then to create a project around any of those that we don't actually need, to just delete them. Like they're not helpful. We want to get rid of it. And we can do all of that within Clarity within 3 minutes. Like it's just slice and dice and create a project out of it. So for us, it was really replacing that spreadsheet one, but then also finding a way to bring all of those different components in to a single area. So that was the idea with Clarity. We have maybe like 500 users who have signed up to be a part of it. And so we're kind of still in the early stages, but also at the point where like have some traction and people who are really excited about it and using it.
Yeah. So the core function is really updating content or removing content, like you said, really being able to analyze all your posts, being able to see what needs to be updated, how to actually update that, what's seeing it a lot easier, and kind of managing all those projects with kind of pruning or updating content.
Pruning, updating, or there's a lot of content or, processes that we would go through that would have some unrelated or some kind of random thing that we wanted to do to a specific piece of content, like add affiliate links. So
Yeah.
we wanted to go through and make sure that we add affiliate links to these 20 posts. Where are we tracking that? How are we making sure that it gets done? And then this is the other really important piece on a post specific level, having a note on when that change happened. So then we can go back and see, like, historically, did things change in one direction or another based on that change? That was the other piece, is we didn't have a good place to annotate that. We could do it within Google Analytics and create an annotation, but then it's like I don't think there's a way to do this on a post specific level. It was a site-wide annotation. So like if we made a change to one specific post, we noted that in Google Analytics, we would just see that everywhere. So we'd have like all of these annotations kind of floating around. So that was the other piece that was important, is like the historical point on when changes were made, either by us checking a box and then that being recorded, or by us leaving a note to say, hey, at this point, we made this change. Like, we want to know that just so we can look back to see if something looks different 6 months later.
Right. Did it get better, worse? What happened?
Yeah.
Right.
And then the last piece that's helpful is categories outside of WordPress. So an example for us would be editorial versus sponsored, to be able to segment our content to say, like, this is all sponsored content in this bucket, and to give it a tag or a category to tag that specific piece of content. So we could look at it and say, like, okay, let's take a look at any piece of content that's sponsored to make sure that, like, we could go back to that brand as an example and say, hey, would you want to work with us again? Here's this piece of content, still doing well. So essentially organization outside of WordPress. Like, if we didn't want to assign an actual category, it would be a way for us to organize content as well.
Yeah. No, that's great. So it sounds like if people want to learn more about that, they can go to clarity.com, and that's with an I, clarity with an I. And so, yeah, people can check that out and see what that tool is all about. Sounds like it's gaining some traction. So congrats on that. That's awesome to hear.
Yeah.
I do have one last small curveball for you.
Love it.
What is your favorite recipe on Pinch of Yum?
Okay.
You've got thousands there.
This is really funny because Lindsay, there was one time where Lindsay was like, name a recipe from Pinch of Yum. And I was like,
and you froze.
Yeah, I couldn't think of it. It's like when Jimmy Fallon does the like street interviews and he's like, name a woman. And people are like,
right. When you're on the spot, you can't do it.
Yeah, totally. So there's the thing that we always come back to is there's this like super old recipe, which was like, it was like a grilled cheese with like jam or something like that.
Okay.
And just super random. Lindsay just sent me a text message and it was the eye roll emoji. And she said it actually wasn't the grilled cheese. She's listening in real time from the other room. But Lindsay, send me the recipe that I'm talking
Help
about.
me out.
But anyway, so anytime that she says, like, somebody says, what's your favorite recipe? And Lindsay's around, I always laugh because I bring that up. I would say one that would be good. She said, we have 1,000 other better recipes on Pinch of Yum. This is like us in real time. You're seeing our like interaction.
That's right. We need to have her on, and then we can really talk food and recipes.
Yeah. I'll say this. There's a chicken gnocchi, which difficult word to spell, GNOCCHI.
Okay.
Soup. That's really good. And we're coming up to that season of like being able to make soups like that.
Yes. Yep.
So I'll send you that link, and then
there you go. We'll put it in the show notes. If anybody is craving that. Awesome. Sorry to put you on the spot there, Bjork.
That was probably the best part of the interview.
Good. So if people want to follow along with you or get in touch with you, are you on Twitter or where else should they go to,
probably best way to get a hold of me is actually email. So for as important as social media is for everything that we have going on, personally, I'm not really active. So it's just bjork@tinybit.com. If somebody wanted to drop you an email and say hi, I can follow up and connect with you there. Otherwise, Pinch of Yum is, pinchofyum.com, and then all the other places. And if people want to see all the other kind of brands and what we're up to, you can check out tinybit.com.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Bjork, so much for coming on the show. Shared lots of great tips, both SEO, general business, and otherwise. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Spencer.
Thank you.